Hi, so in this chapter we're going to cover attraction, arousal, and response. One of the first questions we could ask is, what is beauty? Beauty has foundations in both evolutionary adaptive traits and social influences. For example, for men, femininity tends to be a rather important dimension of attractiveness. Men tend to be more visual than women in the attributes they look for, one of them being baby-facedness. Why? From an evolutionary perspective, it conveys youth. Youth is associated with reproductive abilities. We can see for both men and women, we take a very masculine view here, which could be generally viewed as attractive, a very strong chin line, a strong brow, which may represent a historical hunter, a brow and a forehead that blocks the sun out, for example. And as we move through a masculine face to a more feminine face, we look at more neonatal qualities, more feminine and youthful attributes. For example, a softer chin line representing less exposure to testosterone, larger eye structures. We see this the same here. We can take a face and morph it and introduce more baby face features, a smaller mouth area, softer chin area, and it tends to be viewed as more attractive and are very often the attributes individuals look for in models. Other factors that tend to relate to attractiveness is symmetry. Good body and facial symmetry tends to be viewed as more attractive because they are healthier. In fact, facial and body asymmetry tends to co-vary with psychological and or physiological abnormalities. Symmetrical bodies and faces tend to convey health both psychologically and physically. Thus, that's who we want to mate with and are inherently viewed more sexy. When we look at some of the top faces of individuals in movies, Halle Berry, Tom Cruise, you name it, they tend to have very symmetrical faces. And we've done this experimentally in lab. We've taken a face and, for example, taken the nose, straightened it out a bit, and made many of the other facial features more symmetrical, the mouth, and we see an increased level of attractiveness rated by individuals. Another important attribute is body mass index. We do find some cross-cultural differences in body mass and attractiveness across cultures. I will point out, however, that's not the same when we look at hip-to-waist ratio, which in some ways relates to body mass index, in some ways is independent. For women, a healthy BMI is between 18.5 and 25. In Western cultures, we tend to prefer for males and females somewhere between 18 and 22, although most Americans are well above that. Comparatively, if we go to South Africa, the ranges are quite different, between 20 and 40, and that's probably due to local constraints of scarcity of food and historically availability of food. The same thing happened during periods of Western culture when food was less plentiful. You need to display the fact that you had a certain amount of wealth or hardiness to you, in part due to a larger BMI, indicating that if in fact food became scarce, you could survive the long haul. So we see quite a bit of variation in BMI and attractiveness. As I said, though, comparatively, when we look at hip to waist ratio, that seems to be a much better predictor of attractiveness. Women typically want a man with a hip to waist ratio of about 0.9 to 1, basically a straight, lean individual. Comparatively, men tend to want a woman at about 0.7, up to about 0.79, meaning that the waist should be about 70% of what the hips are. This is thought in both cases to correspond to health and, again, a good potential mate from an evolutionary adaptive perspective. You want, for example, a woman with good birthing hips. They've done these studies around the world, even in tribes who've never been exposed to Western media, going into rainforests, showing them silhouettes, and the males will even say, yes, this is the silhouette we most desire. We see this also true historically. When we've gone back and measured the hip-to-waist ratio in several famous paintings, we find that the hip-to-waist ratio, even though the models would be more full-figured by today's standards, the hip-to-waist ratio was still about a 0.7. And the same is true of Marilyn Monroe. She was, I believe, a size 8 or 10, which would be considered not in line with the what you see in magazines today. However, her hip-to-waist ratio, again, was a 0.7. One last thing, what's kind of interesting to me is whereas the 0.7, we actually, males also have invested cheaters. Women for a while wore corsets, and when you put a woman on the move, walking, guys are less able to judge hip-to-waist ratio, so that 0.7 actually goes down to about a 0.65 or so, kind of as a correcting procedure, an overestimation. We can see where in this diagram depicting males, we can look at underweight, normal weight, and overweight men, and you can still get a hip-to-waist ratio of about 0.9 in all circumstances. So where there's some relationship between hip-to-waist ratio and body mass index, it's not a perfect relationship. There's a lot of models of what causes attractiveness. One idea that you may have heard before is opposites attract. Well, quite honestly, the evidence goes counter to that. Historically, you're more apt to marry and date someone of your own religion, your own race, with high levels of similarity. Familiarity breeds. Faces that you're familiar with are viewed more attractive than unfamiliar faces. So generally speaking, opposites do not attract, but certainly there's a lot of exceptions to that rule. Women perceive men with deeper voices to be more attractive. We're not really sure why. Maybe it's a sign that higher levels of testosterone. Men perceive women with higher pitched voices to be more attractive. Again, less testosterone, or it could also relate to other cues that it gives you a higher notion, a stronger idea of that the potential mate is a potential mate of the opposite sex. Unconsciously, olfactory mechanisms may also influence arousal. We see very strong influences of pheromones in other species. Fortunately for humans, we don't operate strictly on pheromones. We have higher level cognitive processes that help control our desires based on that. Personality traits also come into play. Trustworthiness, warmth, and a good sense of humor are perceived as attractive. Notice a lot of these can also be traced to evolutionary adaptive traits. If you want to mate with someone and have a child, trustworthiness is important. Warmth, being able for males to display that they're, for example, willing to take care of the offspring, as well as engage with other people. Humor, both men and women say they want a partner who is funny. However, there's big differences in what that means between men and women. As I may have said before, men want someone who will laugh at their dumb jokes. Women want someone who will make them laugh. Men tend to express humor more often and are usually judged as funnier even when you take out other variables. And we see this cross-culturally, so it may very well be again an evolutionary adaptive trait, showing that if you're funny, you can get along with people, you can be creative, you can socially navigate the world, and those are positive traits in terms of gaining resources. I'm going to turn a bit to now one of my favorite studies ever conducted in science, quite honestly. It's called the Coolidge effect. It's called the Coolidge effect because President Coolidge and his wife were touring a chicken ranch when they got separated, and Mrs. Coolidge happened upon a rooster having sex with a chicken. And, it was a bit awkward, but the rancher said, oh, by the way, the rooster can have sex up to 20 times a day. And the first lady joked, well, why don't you tell that to the president? So when they told that to the president joked back, yes, but is that the same chicken each time? And it's not. So yes, Bill Clinton wasn't the only one to be unfaithful. There's multiple stories of several presidents being infidelities. So what they found is that when males typically have sex, they go through a refractory period, a period of time where they can't engage in sex again. However, women don't experience that. They can continuing to have sex, have multiple partners. Well, what they found is that the refractory period could largely be eliminated if you swap partners out. They see that this, especially in sheep, that rams would go off and continually have sex. So they had to examine this experimentally. So what they did is someone wrote a grant, someone looked at the grant and approved it, which I find funny in its own right. And what they did is they took sheep, and what you need to do is eliminate all the other variables and show that the recognition of partners is pheromone based on the smell. So you can't blindfold a sheep or a ram, otherwise it can't engage in sex. So what you have to do is make the sheep unrecognizable. So they put Halloween masks on the sheep as well as long overcoats, and when when the ram had sex with a sheep and they put the same sheep back in front of it, it experienced a refractory period. When the ram had sex with a sheep and they put a new partner there, it would again now have sex with that sheep. And what they found is the experimenters got tired of changing out sheep prior to the ram being tired of having sex with various sheep. Now, this hasn't been done with humans as far as I know, but the point is we can look at this as an evolutionary adaptive trait. It's advantageous to the male to try and sow its seed in multiple females to produce offspring. It's less advantageous to expend the energy to sow its seed in the same female. When we look at the difference in response times, we can see that here, for example, men go through this refractory period and then are able to perform again. Women may not. And again, you can get rid of that refractory period if, in fact, you swap partners out. We do find very strong influences of hormonal effects on people's behavior. Women tend to be more attracted to masculine faces and deeper voices at the time of ovulation. They also tend to dress in a more sexy manner at the time of ovulation. A third one I find very interesting is their gaydar is better. You present faces of straight and gay men to women. At the point of ovulation, they are better able to differentiate gay men from straight. Because in essence, why waste your time pursuing a gay man when in fact it may not help you conceive? Men tend to tip female dancers more at the woman's time of ovulation. So whatever this means, maybe there's certainly some level of control on a hormonal level toward our behaviors that we tend to be unconscious of. I suppose if you wanted to be somewhat manipulative, you can ask your significant other for more favors and things at that point because he will view you as more attractive. Nobody wants to take this as a compliment, but averageness is good. No one wants to hear you look average. But average features are judged to be more attractive, much like Goldilocks, not too big, not too small, just right. An average sized nose is, for example, better than small or large in general. And we can see when we take averages of faces, that tends to be true. One area that has become more notable in media and research are asexuals. Asexuals still may experience some romantic attraction and a desire for psychological intimacy, but less so for sexual. Nikola Tesla was a famous asexual, just didn't really express much interest in sex. That doesn't mean asexuals don't have sex on occasion. As they may say, it's just something you do to clean the pipes. So one of the big issues we have experimentally is how do you really define an asexual? There seems to be a lot of variability and a lot of notions of acceptance, which is great, that if you think you are, then you are. But again, that may not necessarily be the best thing for us to study and understand a phenomena, because there may be over-inclusion of individuals. But if you're interested in a hot new topic of research, that certainly is one. There's a lot of different aspects that may promote sexuality and arousal, some entirely from within, hormonally based, or fantasies. Others may come from external stimuli, seeing attractive individuals, whatever it may be, exposure of other people's pheromones producing sexual arousal. Men tend to have more sexual fantasies than women, and also they have a much greater variety in sexual fantasies. I will say, I'll comment that most sexologists agree that engaging in sexual fantasies is probably a positive thing. However, there's a big difference between fantasies and what you may want to do in real life. For example, women often fantasize about a rape or a ravishment fantasy, but that certainly does not mean women want to get raped in real life. What's to me interesting is when we look at the content of fantasies, the genders do differ. Men, for example, fantasize more about multiple partners. Women fantasize more about being seen or in public. Women also, by the way, fantasize more often about sex with animals. Not really sure the cause of that one. And again, some of the fantasies can't even happen, like sex with dragons. But I guess Comic-Con could be one way to fulfill that to a degree.